Beware, predators are raging. In June 2023, Leopards, German-made tanks, appeared on the Ukrainian frontline. Currently, there are two generations and several modifications of combat vehicles in service in Ukraine. However, each tank is assigned to a specific combat unit to simplify their maintenance, explains Mykola Salamaha, the armor industry specialist. Different types of tanks used in different brigades to simplify logistics for their brigades, and they are used in general in the same way as our brigade commanders, brigade headquarters and battalion headquarters are used to use tanks as the Soviet ones, meant both in defense and offense. In fact, Leopards are not new vehicles. The first generation of this tank was put into service almost 60 years ago, in 1965. It was the first German tank to be created after the Second World War. It was designed primarily to fight Soviet tanks, and it was focused first of all on firepower. So the 105mm rifle gun, which was very powerful at that time, and the ammunition for it was probably the best developed in the world at that time. The gun became the main feature of the first Leopard. It is capable of firing 10 shots per minute, and each of them is incredibly powerful and accurate because of the rifle tube. It is a British rifle gun, produced under licensing. It was manufactured in the USA, Germany and Israel. Without a license, it is produced only in China. The amount of ammunition for it around the world is about the same as for the Soviet tank guns. And this is a huge advantage if we talk about the use of Leopard 1 in Ukraine. After all, our country does not have its own production of projectiles specifically for this gun. Another advantage of the first Leopard is maneuverability and speed. Their power unit allows you to accelerate the 40-ton machine up to 65 km per hour. The Germans have an engine with a capacity of 1,500 horsepower, and this gave them the opportunity to use the advantage of their engine in an automatic transmission. The first generation of Leopards has been undergoing improvements for 20 years. Before being shipped to Ukraine, the 1A5 models were slightly upgraded, while already in the country, the combat vehicles underwent an additional upgrade. After all, a full-scale war made us think about fighting with new types of weapons, for example, with FPV drones. Some brigades have 1A5 Leopards with dynamic protection and anti-drone nets. After the first generation Leopards, Germany started working on the second generation. The Leopard 2 appeared about 15 years after Germany started producing the first line of tanks. While the Leopard the first was being modernized and produced in parallel, the second generation of tanks was intended to be more balanced. Western world realized that a tank is still an universal means of fighting the enemy on the battlefield, and that is necessary to regularly balance protection, firepower and maneuverability. Second-generation Leopards are also actively used in the Russian-Ukrainian war. Our defenders highly appreciated this vehicle because of the simplicity and similarity of important elements in different models. Even Leopards of the first and second generation have many of the same parts. This is unification, and it allows firstly to simplify logistics very much, and secondly, it allows repair on the field when you can get spare parts faster. This unification allows for very quick tank repairing. This can be done even on the field.
Німецька техніка розроблялася.
German equipment was developed taking into account the fact that the engine transmission unit can be replaced in 30–40 minutes if there is a crane and spare engine transmission unit on the field. This is what fundamentally distinguishes the German tanks that Ukraine received from the Soviet tanks that were used at the beginning of the full-scale war and continue to be used today. Damage to engine of a T-64 or T-72, for example, becomes a big problem. It takes longer to repair a Soviet tank. Moreover, it needs to be transported for repairs. Replacing something, roughly speaking, on the field is at least incredibly difficult and more often than not, simply impossible.
Радянські танки так не
Soviet tanks are not designed like this, and it usually takes 12 hours with a battalion armor repair unit to replace engine on a T-64 tank and more than a day for an untrained crew to replace a T-72 tank engine. The only Leopard fighting in Ukraine that is a little different from other tank models is the Leopard 2A5, but it has a different feature.
Ця машина абсолютно.
This is a vehicle of a completely different generation. It has a different engine, it has a different workplace for the driver, but it has its advantages. Why? Because it is even simpler. Leopards of the second generation are equipped with different weapons. The first generation 105mm rifle cannon has been replaced by a 120mm smoothbore. It can fire up to 12 times per minute, and a trained crew can hit from 5 to 7 targets in the same 60 seconds. For Ukraine, the issue of ammunition was also important when it came to using Leopards 2 tanks. Mykola Salamaha claims there is no shortage of them.
Практично всі ті натівські, які
Almost all of NATO can be used. Again, there are no problems with ammunition. We get such ammunition from several manufacturers. In total, various countries promised to send Ukraine more than 100 Leopards. However, at the end, the promises were added too, and it is not known exactly how many of these vehicles were eventually promised and how many of them were sent. We can certainly say that in tank duels, Ukrainian equipment made in Germany is winning over Russian scrap metal.
маємо втрати.
We have losses, but if we compare in percentage terms, there are much smaller losses than the Russians when using tanks on the battlefield. It is also worth mentioning that Leopard is not just about tanks. Self-propelled artillery systems, armored personnel carriers and other equipment that is used by the armed forces of Ukraine are based on the chassis of these vehicles.